present situation is developing into such a thing that the planet Earth is saying, you used me. I'm willing to nourish you, I'm willing to protect you, to heal you, to clothe you, to feed you, but don't use me. Sit down a minute. The humans must reinvent themselves at this stage, because this has gone so far that the very idea of the human, the purpose of the human, and how the human functions on the planet Earth has been disturbed. And unless we rediscover the human in its most basic meaning and its most fundamental significance, it's only then that we will begin to rectify the situation that has developed. And so, in that manner, we, in a sense, recode. Of course, it's a metaphor. It's not to be taken absolutely literally, but it is a way of speaking of a more profound and a more extensive rethinking of the human than we are generally accustomed to do. This expansion of our horizon to the stars is a good way of describing the self-exaltation of the human in the 20th century. We were fascinated with the accomplishment that we were having. When I was born in the early part of the century in 1914, this city that's now 200,000 was only 15,000. The whole world had only 1 billion people. And it took all of history up until 1750 to arrive at 1 billion people. I was born before the second billion came in 1920. In the year 2000, there were 6 billion. So it went from 1 billion to 6 billion in that short period of time, whereas to produce 1 billion had taken all of history up until the 1 billion, a little over 1.5 billion, a little over 1.5 billion people, not 2 billion, by the time I was born. So you get some idea of the acceleration of history and the change that has taken place. And we were fascinated with what we were able to do and the controls we were able to exercise and the advantages we could have for the human project. But then all of a sudden, we find that those wonders we were achieving also had a destructive aspect that we had not foreseen or allowed for. The automobile that we thought was so wonderful, now we find is doing enormous damage, both in the use of energy and in the pollution that it's causing, and in the destruction of fertile land and a number of different ways. The buildings that we were creating throughout the world and the cutting down of trees at a ferocious pace. All of this we thought we were doing some wonderful things for the human project, but we forgot that what the human project does is dependent on the Earth project. If the Earth does not succeed, humans can't succeed. If humans think that they can benefit by afflicting the Earth or by disturbing the functioning of Earth, then it's the silliest thing a person could imagine. I speak of the idea of dream because what we're faced with is a creativity phase of our historical existence that needs extensive imagination. It's imagination that's a guide in critical circumstances, because the future has to be imagined before it can be created. I sometimes say the dream drives the action. So it is the dream of what can be that drives the action of any generation that is working toward some fulfillment out of an unacceptable present. Because the future has to be imagined before it can be created. I sometimes say the dream drives the action. So it is the dream of what can be that drives the action of any generation that is working toward some fulfillment out of an unacceptable present. The difficulties that we're causing for ourselves through our excessive exploitation of the planet are such that life is becoming extremely difficult and to take care of. The flowers and plants and the animals all feel threatened. What we are faced with in historical terms is a transition from a 20th century that exploited the planet Earth to a 21st century when that exploitation cannot continue. And so either we are going to change our way of dealing with the planet Earth, or else the planet Earth is going to go into a certain negative aspect, and as humans we'll be caught in it. Frequently talk about our transition from the 20th to the 21st century to give the future a specific time and place and a sequence of time, so that we can educate young people with the sense that they are creating a vastly different human-Earth relationship than that which they're inheriting. And so it's a rather tragic thing to have to deal with, but such is the nature of our times. This whole disassociation of the human from the natural world can be traced back to the 14th century and the 15th century particularly, because until then the natural world was a sacred world. It was revelatory. Christians had not only the Bible, but they had the natural world, and the natural world had a revelatory aspect equal to the Bible, different from, but in a sense equal to, because it was a revelation of the same deity, the mode different. This is why words are used analogously in basic thought concerning human affairs, or basic ideas of the earth, or basic philosophical ideas. literal. You don't have literal language. You have to use symbolic language, but you have to use language like I use when I say every being has rights. Rights means that you give every being its due. But then rights are different. The rights needed by an animal or by a pigeon are different from the rights needed by a tree. So that the rights are the same in the sense of giving a being its due, but they're different in what's given. And so when you think of revelation and you think of the natural world as revelatory and the scriptures as revelatory, it's equally the same deity that's presenting itself, but in a different mode and saying different things. We learn things different from the universe revelatory presentation and the biblical revelatory presentation. But they are equally sacred. They're equally divine communication, qualitatively different, but the same presentation of the same idea of deity in different modes. So what happened was this lasted, this sense of twofold revelation, the sense of the natural world and the protection of the natural world survived up until the 13th, 14th century, but then the assault, the Black Death occurred in the 14th century, in the 1340s, in the 14th century. And at this time, almost half of Europe died. It was the most devastating physiological stroke that has ever hit Europe. And it took 2 centuries to get beyond this. And this, since this came from the natural world, it caused people to withdraw from a sense of the natural world as a sacred world. And then what happened also was in the 15th century, you had the discovery of printing. And so Bibles were printed for the first time, and people were reading Bibles. And as soon as you got the Bibles, all the Christian groups became Bible-oriented people rather than earth-oriented people. And in this manner, the Western world lost its attachment to the planet Earth. And we end up where we are at the present time with this exploitation, this ruthless exploitation of the planet Earth for supposed human benefits, but with a totally destructive impact. It has to do with intimate relationship, the intimate relationship of humans with the natural world. And ecozoic is a designation of that period in history when humans established that profound intimacy between humans and the earth. Child awakens to a universe. The mind of the child to a world of wonder, imagination to a world of beauty, emotions to a world of intimacy. It takes a universe to make a child, both in outer form and inner spirit. It takes a universe to educate a child. It takes a universe to fulfill a child. And the first obligation of the adult generation to its children is to bring these two together. So the child is intimate with the universe, and the universe is intimate with the child, while the stars ring out in the heavens. This sense of how humans relate to the earth is so important because science that gives us the means to exploit the earth so extensively gives us no guidance whatsoever on how to use science. That is the first thing about science. Science does not guide concerning the use of science. And it's that inability of science to guide humans in its own use that has led to such difficulty. The human is that being in whom the universe reflects on and celebrates itself in a special mode of conscious self-awareness. That's your basic idea of the human. Humans have primary a role of intellect, of intelligence, of consciousness. The human is the consciousness of the universe. There would be no universe formally without the human. That's why the human is so all important, because the pre-human world, or the non-human world, has no knowledge of itself. It is devoid of self-comprehension. It's only the human that enables the universe to be a universe, you might say. And that's why, with the greatest of the medieval thinkers, with St. Thomas, he speaks of the universe, and he goes back to the book of Genesis, where after each creation, God says it's good. After the last part of creation, God says, of the whole universe, says it's very good. And the reason why is because the universe itself is the oblast, the universe is the ultimate and noblest perfection in things. That's the definition that Thomas gives of the universe. The universe is the ultimate and noblest dimension of the universe. Now, that's because the human, we have to realize, when we talk about the universe, we're not talking from out here at something over there. We're talking about something inside. We're inside the universe and talking about the universe, so that the universe is being known as subject, not as object, so that it's a mode of self-awareness of the universe that constitutes the human place in the universe. And it is that understanding that has gone awry, or that has been disordered or interrupted by our modern world of exploitation. And this world of exploitation has come to dominate the four major aspects, or the four major controls that we have over the universe. The political social control, the educational scientific control, the economic industrial control, and the religious moral. Now these four are the establishment that each has authority. They speak with authority, and they govern the human project from a certain point of view, or the dominant influence over the project from a certain point of view. It's unfortunate that all four of these have become distracted from, or somehow detached from their original rootedness in the natural world and their original primary concern for the well-being of the natural world. But they all four depend on the natural world. Economics depends absolutely on the natural world. Without the creation of the fields, and without the creation of the animals in the land and in the water, without all the different productions of earth, there's no economics that's worth talking about. And so with all the other aspects of life, the earth is the primary origin, the primary referent, and the primary guide to all of them. Lack of appreciation comes fundamentally from lack of any direction, any reasonable direction that we give to our activities. As I mentioned, we have our four basic areas of activity, and when those four get distracted from their basic need to be guides and contribute to and give shape to the meaning of the earth, then if they fail in this, it's something that is difficult to remedy. Our lives have been taken over by the industrial world and its various manifestations. That's one of the powers that modern transportation, modern entertainment, modern education, modern activities of all different sorts, all has created an absorbing sequence of endless activities that sweep us up in their various expressions, and so that we end up with a negative fulfillment that is without fulfillment. Indigenous cultures have everything to teach us. They need to teach us the simplest aspects of what it is to be a human being. They need to teach us how to get our food without destroying the planet. They teach us how to pray. They teach us how to educate, and they teach us civility to the planet Earth. I've been in touch with indigenous peoples all my life. I have a whole big collection of things that were given to me by indigenous peoples after I spent time among them, and some of them are quite striking. after I spoke, I remember one of the elders spoke. In the process, he turned to me and said that he never heard any non-Indian speak so much like an Indian. And then he addressed me as grandfather. So I always considered that as one of the tributes that I valued most in my career. Considered grandfather with indigenous peoples. And hard to realize it, but that has become a question, the survival of the natural world in its full functional force. That it will survive, a person might easily grant, but it's the condition in which it survives. And whether it will survive in anything like the wonderful qualities that it had in its earlier phase is the question. And that is why the Human Project why it's so urgent that the Human Project get on with the renewal of the earth at this time. And a person might say that there's not a lot of time left because the woodlands are being destroyed at a fantastic rate. The number of species extinct every year is an amazingly high extinction rate. And the capacities of Earth to sustain this onslaught is increasingly diminished. That's why it's urgency, and that's why the children of the next generation that are going to inherit the problem need to be educated for the task that they will be called upon to fulfill, because they will be called to fulfill and to remedy the damage that their forefathers have brought about. So instead of leaving them with a wonderful heritage, and that's the tragedy, is that humans thought they were doing such wonderful things for their children. They thought they were building such a wonder world for children. And now they find that we're doing great damage to the world of our children, and we are building a world in which they cannot live, and in which nothing else can live in its full natural grandeur.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, maybe it's enough for right now.
Yeah, let's take a break.
Okay. The great work is to create the 21st century as a century of creativity, as a century of life in its full expansion, and as a period when humans will be present to the planet in a mutually enhancing way. Why is there a universe? Or why are there humans? Well, why are there humans? Because the universe needs a conscious identity. Without the human, the universe may be all together in a wonderful expression of life, but is lacking in consciousness. And consciousness, it makes all the difference in the world. To bring out the radical power of consciousness, and it's consciousness that enables the human to be so destructive and so overwhelming to other modes of being that do not have reflective consciousness. The birds cannot do what we do. The animals cannot do this. Each individually can do a certain amount, but none of them can understand or assault the different life principles of Earth the way the humans can, and that is a consequence of consciousness. And this capacity to act through conscious awareness, analysis, and understanding is what makes the human so powerful and so ultimate in the decision that humans make. And that's what's happening now. This is consciousness gone berserk. It's consciousness that lost its discipline, it's lost its integrity, and it's lost its guidance. The recovery of this is what is urgent for the 21st century, because this ending of the 20th century must be numbered among the geological phases of history as well as the human phases of history. The problem of the human is how to respond to this, not by exploiting the natural world, but by responding to its needs to fulfill its expression of life, and which is ultimately the purpose of each being, is to give a particular expression to life. And the whole complex of beings is what makes the universe such a fascinating and such an enthralling reality. Now, this is a great distinction between the free participation in the benefits that the different modes of being offer to each other. But when one mode of being begins to be an obsession, taking over another being for its own personal advantage rather than the community well-being, then it becomes vicious. And that which was so beautiful becomes so destructive. And so what has to be worked toward is the integral relationship between humans and the earth, because differences exist for each other. Identity is meaningless because one being has what the other has. Neither can give anything to the other. There has to be difference for one being to be able to share with the other and to participate in a common life, so that this difference in identity is the deepest secret of the universe, and it's the foundation of what we call our love relationships, that out of which life and energy and vigor all flow. Present is such a time when a Noah's Ark is urgently needed, we might say. A reality, symbolically, is a role that all of us are called upon to play. We're all contributing to a vast, comprehensive, planetary arc of salvation from the destruction that has been imposed upon this present planetary process during the 20th century. So this idea of a Noah's Ark is a precedent that gives us a basic idea of how things function in a time of comprehensive decision making. I don't know what you'll find, but you may find a few sentences worthwhile.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, combined with the others, that you surely must be picking up some real gems. A present situation is developing into such a thing that the planet Earth is saying, you used me. I'm willing to nourish you, I'm willing to protect you, to heal you, to clothe you, to feed you, but don't use me.